So let's get into this willpower paradox. And what I'm going to show you in the video is that it's not a paradox at all. The reason people refer to it as such is that there's a misunderstanding of how the mind works. People leave out its rascal-like nature, its oppositional-like nature, how the mind wants to do everything it's told not to do. And that's what makes it seem like a paradox. Now, a couple videos ago, I just really briefly mentioned some of the research on this, and I left out all the critical details, which is super important. So let's get there first. And so let's imagine we've got two groups, and they're both going to do the same anagram task, where you've got a word and you have to switch around the letters to make a different word. And they're both going to do self-talk. In fact, the instructions are really, really subtly different. And one group will say, I will do an anagram task. And so it's kind of command-like. The other group is far more open. So they're going to say to themselves, will I do an anagram task? So it's more questioning and open as opposed to like a command. And the paradox results from the fact that the second group, the one that's more open, saying, will I actually do better than the first? And the reason that's considered a paradox is because we have a very straightforward idea of the self and the will. So if we say, I will exercise tomorrow, it's just expected that I'll do better than if I just pondered over it. So let me talk about and this happens with all kinds of different tasks, whether it's exercise, changing your diet, or cognitive task. Let me talk about the four, and this is a really interesting list that I've come up with, and I mentioned it in other videos. I can only find 4 references to the oppositional nature of the mind, regardless of how critical it is to our understanding. First, of course, is Alan Watts. I've done 100+ videos on Alan Watts, and he talked about this often, how if I say don't think of the number 13, that's all you can think of. But it extends out quite a bit. So if you desperately need to get up early tomorrow and you're trying really hard to sleep, you're up all night. If it's New Year's and you're desperately trying to stay up till midnight, you fall asleep at 10. Aldous Huxley mentioned it. I think he called it the law of opposite effort. Now, actually, Viktor Frankle, very well-known psychologist for his logotherapy, but he also had something that doesn't get mentioned as much, his paradoxical intention. And very successfully, he talks about it at the end of Man's Search for Meaning. And he had a patient once who was a medical doctor, profusely would sweat. His hands would sweat all the time. So you can imagine how embarrassing that would be. So Frankle told him to actually make your hands sweat. And this is like using this oppositional nature against itself. So he would force his hands to sweat, and they stopped sweating altogether. And a very, very interesting take that never seemed to get picked up by mainstream psychology. Carl Rogers also mentioned it in one line I found. And of course, to be fair, there's a phrase called reverse psychology that we sometimes use, but you can't find that in any psych textbook because it was never really taken seriously. And so the whole reason this is thought of as a paradox is because we just expect the will to be straightforward. We leave out the oppositional nature of the mind and how you can, like sailing into the wind, you can actually use it against itself in a way. And so where does this oppositional force come from? Well, actually, you see it throughout the nervous system. And so we've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic. We've got all systems are trying to maintain homeostasis and balance. And so if you're outside and you get too cold, you start to shiver. And so it goes in the other direction and warms you up. If you're out running and you're starting to sweat and get too hot, you start to sweat, and then that cools you down. And so we've got all these oppositional systems throughout the nervous system, throughout the body. And if thoughts are generated by the brain, it makes perfect sense that they may have this oppositional tendency. And so the reason it's not a paradox is because when you say, I will do anything, I will sleep, I will do anything, whatever it is, there's this opposing force that comes in and goes in the opposite direction. But if you leave it open, will I exercise tomorrow? You sidestep that oppositional force. In the East, they call this Wu Wei. They actually figured out a long time ago. They're so much further ahead than Western science is in understanding the mind, because they understood that if you left things as they are, and like almost like beginner's luck. And if you've ever, like the first time you threw a dart, you got a bullseye. And the reason you were so successful is because you weren't trying. You were putting no effort into it. And so it's not a paradox at all that the second group, will I, the reason they're so successful, the reason they're so much more successful is they sidestep that oppositional rascal-like nature of the mind.